I'm almost sure nobody will believe my story, but I'm going to write it down anyway because it's all true. It started out on a mostly deserted piece of land in the middle of nowhere. In the spirit of being totally honest, there were a few cows wandering around, but I figure they didn't count. As I think about it, my story actually started about 6 months ago, when my wife, Cindy, got a new boss, Alex Goodwin. My name is Don Perkins, and I was one of those clueless husbands. I was raised in a loving family where my mother and father loved and cherished each other. I just assumed that I would have the same kind of marriage. I was crazy about my wife and thought she was crazy about me. Well, at least half of what I believed was correct. My wife set me straight on which half was wrong. "Don," she said over the phone, "I know I'm being a coward by not facing you, but I've fallen in love with Alex. I'm going to be staying with him from now on. I'll send for my things in a few days." Then she hung up. I met Cindy in college when she was going for a 2-year degree to become a paralegal. I was taking a 4-year course in business administration with a minor in construction. We dated a few times, but our schedules were such that it didn't work. Then Cindy graduated and was gone. After graduation, I started a small construction company. Over 7 years, I built it up to where it was netting me about $300,000 a year. Cindy and I got married 4 years ago. And up until tonight, I thought we were happy. Talk about clueless. If you look up clueless in the dictionary, you'll find my picture there. Cindy had that all-American look, and she could make you believe you were the most important person in the world. I thought we were really happy together. We had even been talking about having kids. Of course, I didn't know that Cindy was on the pill and had no intention of getting pregnant ever. The other thing I didn't realize was that Cindy was a gold digger and a size queen. Making about $300,000 a year allowed us to live quite well. Still, Cindy was always looking to trade up. And apparently, she found that in Alex Goodwin, who was a partner in the largest law firm in 4 counties. I don't know for sure. I've never measured it. Devastated, I did what any red-blooded American who just had his heart ripped out would do. I grabbed a bottle of vodka, a 9mm pistol, and headed out to the middle of nowhere. Oh, don't misunderstand, I loved Cindy with all my heart, but I had no intention of killing myself. So why did I bring the gun? Fair question. You see, in my addled brain, I thought I'd call up Cindy and tell her I was devastated by her leaving me and then fire the gun off next to the phone. I thought it would scare the shit out of her, and that seemed funny to me. Unfortunately, where I finally parked, there was no cell service. That about summed up my day. Anyway, I was just sitting there when I saw 2 red lights in the sky. At first, I thought they were just planes flying overhead. But then they got closer and closer. Suddenly, I realized that these were 2 fireballs. They finally crashed into the far end of the field across the road from me. The subsequent explosion actually lifted the front end of the car off the ground a couple of feet. What happened next is kind of blurry because of all the vodka I'd consumed. The vodka, that was another half-baked plan of mine. I intended to get stinking drunk and throw up in the car. It was Cindy's, so I figured she could live with the smell. It's really hard to get the smell of puke out of an automobile, but I never got to do that. As I said, it's all kind of blurry. But what I do remember is staggering out of the car and stumbling across the road. As I got closer, it seems that 2 people were crawling out of the 2 holes created by the impacts. One appeared to be naked, and the other was wearing what looked like a hazmat suit. The person in the hazmat suit, I think, fired something at me. I do remember a small explosion erupting about 5 yards to the left of me. The explosion startled me and pissed me off because it shattered my vodka bottle. I probably should have been more afraid, but alcohol does that to you. Anyway, I fired 2 rounds from the pistol at the hazmat suit. I must have hit something because it flared up into brilliant light and then was gone. That scared the shit out of me because I thought I had killed somebody. Okay, I admit my first impulse was to run like hell. But when I got to the car, I began thinking about the naked person. I couldn't just leave them there. And as it would turn out, I'm super glad I didn't. When I got back to the naked person, he appeared to be badly burned. I was pretty sure that it was a burned dude. I mean, he didn't seem to have any hair. There were no lips, and he only had half a nose. He looked to be in rough shape as his skin looked red and raw. However, he did have what looked like a tiny arm. Anyway, I had to get him to a hospital. Then I was going to run like hell. With any luck, no one would know who I was. When I got to him, he was screaming gibberish. And when I tried to help him up, He pushed my hand aside. Then he put his forefinger on my forehead. For a few seconds, I got dizzy, and I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but it felt like my brain was itching like crazy. Sometimes, it still itches. In mid-gibberish, he began to speak English. Cousin tried to finish me. He couldn't just let me serve my banishment. I was stunned, and all I could think to say was, "So, your cousin tried to kill you?" It was then that he seemed to notice me. "Who the love are you?" "My name is Don Perkins, and I'm going to get you to a hospital." "I don't want to go to any hospital," he said forcefully. "What the love is a hospital?" I assumed that the crash had scrambled this guy's brains, so I decided to play along. "A hospital is where they take care of people who are sick or have been injured. You've been injured, so I'm taking you to a hospital." "I'm fine," he insisted as he stood up. "Take me to your dwelling." As he stood, I was shocked to see that his head now had short blonde hair. His face looked totally fine, and even his nose looked normal. Also, his arm was a lot longer. I wondered if he was getting a hard-on. I figured it had to be the vodka, or I was losing my mind. He started to walk away and then looked back. "You coming, asshole?" I would have just taken off and left this fool in the field, but he had seen my face. And I was concerned that there would be an investigation into the death of the other fellow. So, I decided to take him with me until I could figure out what he intended to do. I don't know what I was thinking. There was no way I would kill him if he wanted to go to the police. No matter how I analyzed my situation, it seemed that I was royally loved no matter what I did. Somehow, I got us back to my house without getting stopped. And once I got him settled in the kitchen, I hunted up a pair of pants and a sweatshirt for him to wear. Then I made a pot of coffee. Then for the next hour, this man told me the most incredible story. I started out only half listening because I was more concerned with my problem, that of being a murderer. But as his story began to unfold, I had no choice but to pay attention. My visitor, who I was convinced was insane, claimed that he had been exiled to this world. He came from a planet 647,000 light years from here. According to him, on his world, the beings were energy-based. He explained, he had lost a power struggle with his cousin and was exiled to this planet. This meant that he had to take the physical form of the species that inhabited this world. I kept a firm grip on my pistol because I figured this guy could be dangerous. But that all changed when I challenged him. I figured he was full of crap and possibly an escapee from some asylum. "That's all very interesting," I finally interrupted. "But I think it's time for you to move on. Where can I take you?" He looked at me with annoyance and then sighed. "Don't be a chicken shit. Why don't you just come out and say it? It's obvious that a brain like you doesn't believe me. What can I do to convince you?" "That's okay," I said, standing up, taking a firmer grip on the pistol. "Just tell me where you want me to drop you off." The next thing I knew, I was pressed against the ceiling. Then my guest floated up a chair and moved me into it. I was now sitting on a chair in midair in my kitchen. I had just had my Sunday come to Jesus moment. I was prepared to believe anything he told me. When he was satisfied that I was sufficiently convinced, he floated me back to the floor. I just sat there staring at him while he smirked. Then his stomach growled, which caused him to jump to his feet and exclaim, "This body is defective." "No, it's not," I said with a laugh. "You're probably just hungry. I'll fix you something to eat." "Eat?" The man seemed confused for a second, and then his eyes lit up. "Yes, of course. Your species needs to consume nourishment throughout the day. What a waste of time." I made some bacon and scrambled some eggs for him. However, it was the cup of coffee that seemed to totally thrill him. I warned him that it was hot and to be careful, but he gulped it down anyway. Then his eyes went wide, and I was sure he had scorched his throat. But that wasn't it. Turns out that it was the caffeine in the coffee that had stimulated the pleasure portion of his brain. After that, he wasn't interested in the food, he just wanted more coffee. After consuming a pot of coffee, he wasn't getting the same stimulation, so he decided to eat what I had prepared. After consuming a dozen eggs, a pound of bacon, half a loaf of bread, and another pot of coffee, my guest started yawning. However, during the hour he had spent consuming mass quantities, he explained what had landed him in his current situation. In a rambling dialogue, my guest explained that he had lost some kind of power struggle for the leadership of his homeworld to the equivalent of a cousin, but that wasn't quite what the relationship was. After a half hour of trying to explain to me, I told him to forget it, We just consider him as his cousin. And as near as I could understand, these power struggles went on all the time. And losing such a contest meant banishment to a remote part of their planet for a year. However, his cousin had banished him for 5 years to a primitive planet, and then sent one of his assistants to drain his energy to a level where he wouldn't be able to return home. When I asked him where he was from and what his name was, he told me I'd never be able to pronounce either. And he was right. However, after a series of whistles, clicks, and gibberish, I heard something that sounded like Izzy at the end of his name. So, I told him I was going to call him Izzy. He seemed really pleased with that. There was no accounting for what pleased him. Izzy then explained that he had learned my language by probing my mind. That made me feel better. I wasn't crazy about my brain itching. Anyway, I asked him how it was that he was so ignorant about so many other things. His answer was quite condescending. He said that our brains were so inefficient and chaotic that it was time-consuming and nauseating to seek information that way. All throughout our talk, his responses were peppered with profanity. That began to wear on my nerves. How come you use so much profanity when you're talking? I finally asked him after he told me for the 5th time that the coffee was wonderful. Izzy looked at me, surprised. Those words were predominant in your mind. And now that you mention it, who is the bitch that overpowers everything else in that limited brain of yours? I spent about 5 minutes giving Izzy the short version of my wife leaving me for her boss. Apparently, my explanation made no sense to him. I would learn later that his species have no emotions, no loves, and reproduce. And he calls Earth a primitive planet. A look of horror and disgust suddenly filled Izzy's face. Your species still have 2 loves, and you couple to reproduce, don't you? What's wrong with that? I responded. By the wormholes of Gadakramesh, when I get home, I'm going to taste most of the life force out of my cousin and then banish him to a planet of slug worms. I decided not to inquire further about slug worms. Besides, Izzy was having a hard time keeping his eyes open. So, I suggested that we go to bed. I had forgotten that, Izzy said as he shook his head. Your species spend 1/3 of your pitifully short lives sleeping. After getting Izzy set up in the spare room, I had trouble getting to sleep, trying to figure out what I was going to do with this wacko guest of mine. I was also still concerned about the demise of his cousin's assistant. But about 7 in the morning, after I had finally just gotten to sleep, Izzy came bursting into my room in a panic. My body is defective, he said, shaking me. What are you talking about? I responded groggily. My cousin had me placed in a defective body, he said as he started pacing around the room. How is your body defective? I asked with no attempt to hide my annoyance. I'm leaking from the front and losing gases from the rear, he said in almost panic. I looked down at him, and the front of the pajama pants was soaking wet. At that point, I burst into hysterical laughter. This did not please Izzy, and when I saw his face go dark red, I stopped. You don't have a defective body, I said quickly. You just peed your pants. That's normal. Well, you're not supposed to pee in your pants, but your body is just expelling waste. Waste? Waste? Why am I expelling waste? It's just normal. What the body can use as nourishment, it expels as waste. I tried to explain. Unbelievable, Izzy screamed. This planet is even more primitive than I thought. Yeah, I get it, we're inferior beings. He was starting to get on my nerves again. In the future, though, if you feel that you are going to expel more liquid from that thing hanging between your legs, use the toilet. Pee into that, please. That sent Izzy rushing across the hall to the bathroom. After a minute or so, I heard him peeing into the toilet, and then a roar of laughter. That actually felt good, he said when he returned. Oh yeah. I decided I best give him the bad news right away to avoid a big mess. You will also be expelling solid waste as well. Please be sure to do that in the toilet also. A look of uncertainty appeared on his face. Is that going to come out of my mouth? If it does, what does it taste like? No. I shook my head. It isn't coming out of your mouth, and to save you a very unpleasant experience, don't even think about eating it. It's going to come out of the hole in your rear end. A look of excitement now filled Izzy's face. Is that a pleasurable experience? I nodded. Nothing better than sitting on the toilet and taking a good dump in the morning. With that, Izzy raced back into the bathroom, and I could hear the noises of someone taking a shit. Only Izzy was laughing throughout all of it. At that point, I decided it was in my best interest to instruct him about toilet paper. I didn't want to have to smell him all day. At this point, I wasn't sure about getting him into the shower anytime soon. At breakfast, I learned that Izzy loved Captain Crunch and Trix. He ate a box of each. Then Izzy started asking me a bunch of questions about life on Earth. I answered all of his questions until he started asking about Cindy and her boss Alex. Then I became somewhat defensive. This only piqued Izzy's curiosity. Finally, he demanded to meet them both. I refused. Why can't I meet them? He complained. They are obviously causing you great pain. Don't you wish that to stop? Now Izzy had my complete attention, and I then was willing to explore the possibility of having a sit down with them. But first, I wanted to know what my extraterrestrial guest was talking about. How are you going to stop them from causing me pain? I asked and then quickly added, you can't kill them if that's what you're thinking. Kill? Who said anything about killing anyone? Izzy said, somewhat aghast. We are not permitted to knowingly kill another living thing. It is part of our core existence. If one of my kind purposely killed another being, that act would end their own existence. What about your cousin's assistant? I killed him. Is that going to cause you problems? Izzy snorted. You didn't kill him, you scared him shitless. He simply dispersed his energy to get away. My memory is a little foggy about last night, I said skeptically. However, I'm pretty sure I destroyed whoever was chasing you. They seemed to explode after I shot at them. Besides, why did he try to kill me? Izzy chuckled. You couldn't kill one of my kind even if you dropped one of your nuclear bombs on us. We're pure energy. The suit he was wearing was just so he wouldn't have to go through decontamination. He is currently making his way back to our homeworld. However, without his interdimensional craft, he'll have to make his way to the nearest wormhole. It will take 4 or 5 of your Earth years for him to get home. And he wasn't trying to kill you. He was just trying to scare you away. I digested that for a few moments, and then turned my attention back to Cindy and Alex. So again, how are you going to stop them from causing me pain? An evil grin crossed Izzy's face. It depends on what you want to do. I can alter your feelings toward your mate. I can alter her feelings toward you. Or I can alter the feelings of the male who has taken your mate from you. Can you really do that? I asked as it seemed too good to be true. Yes, I can, but I won't do shit to them until I've had a chance to view their minds. I'm not going to love them up if they don't deserve it. Somewhat deflated, I nodded. I had to admit, I was only viewing things from my point of view. Still, Cindy had sworn to be faithful to me and had broken that promise. In my mind, at least, it would be another matter altogether if she had simply come to me and asked for a divorce. But Cindy didn't do that. Instead, she had decided to cheat on me. As for fool Alex, he had taken up with a married woman. Only the lowest form of scum does that. After explaining my feelings on the subject, I allowed Izzy to view my relationship with my wife directly from my brain. After that, at Izzy's suggestion, I arranged to meet with Cindy and Alex under the guise of working out our separation. I told Izzy that he could pretend to be my attorney. Attorneys were a concept that Izzy didn't understand. When I explained what they were, he took an immediate dislike to them. They sound like leeches. You understand the concept of an attorney perfectly, I said with a smile. I set up a lunch meeting with Alex and Cindy. Then I took Izzy shopping for some new clothes. He insisted on driving to the stores, which I objected to strenuously. However, he was most insistent and informed me that he mastered all forms of interdimensional travel. To him, driving an Earth car would be child's play. But after backing over my rose bushes and knocking my mailbox down, he let me drive. The idea of paying for things before walking out of the store, Izzy did not grasp. It took a bit of coaxing, and about $300 of credit card purchases for crap Izzy wanted before I was able to get him outfitted. On the way to the restaurant, Izzy explained that all he had to do was touch part of their skin, and he would be able to get the information he needed. It would be faster if he could touch their foreheads, but I explained that it wasn't socially acceptable. We also agreed that once Izzy had gathered all the information needed, he'd let me know which of the 3 options was acceptable. Izzy told me that, if nothing else, he would be willing to eliminate my love for Cindy completely. As to whether he would allow me to have revenge on the 2, it would depend on whether he felt they deserved it or not. Surprisingly, revenge was a concept that Izzy said his people were quite familiar with. Honor and respect were of paramount importance. If either were impugned, elaborate schemes of revenge were engaged to punish the offending party or parties. And since there were so many different actions, thoughts, or gestures that could be taken as an offense, Izzy said that his people spent enormous amounts of time devising ways to seek revenge. After explaining that aspect of his people, I couldn't help but feel that this supposedly advanced civilization certainly wasted a lot of time on nonsense. Of course, I kept that idea to myself. When we arrived at the restaurant, Cindy and Alex were already sitting in a booth. They were hugging and kissing without regard to who saw them. It sent my insides to churning, and my anger began to bubble to the surface. Izzy must have realized this because he pulled me to a stop. "Keep your temper under control. If you mess up their minds with your shitty hostility, I may not be able to get an accurate reading. And I might not be able to make the alterations that I want at this time. So, don't be an asshole." As crappy as Izzy's pep talk was, it served its purpose. I hid my discomfort and put on a fake smile. "Cindy, Alex?" I said calmly. "This is my attorney, Mr. John Smith. I'm glad that we can sit down and work this out reasonably." Izzy shook hands with both of them, and we slid into the booth on the opposite side. I then explained that I was willing to split everything we'd earned during our marriage 50-50ths. We'd sell the house and split the proceeds. Since there were no children, there would be no alimony. Alex just smirked at me. "I don't think so. Alimony is definitely going to have to be paid. And Cindy wants half of your company and half of your 401k. She also wants the fine china and the china cabinet. I've prepared a list of our demands." Alex handed the list to Izzy, who glanced at it. Then he smiled at me and looked back at Cindy and Alex. "Apparently, this asshole hasn't given me the whole story. Let me confer with him for a few minutes, and I'm sure we can satisfy your demands." Cindy giggled, and Alex just smirked at me. I wanted to punch his teeth out right then and there, but Izzy grabbed my arm and pulled me away. For several moments, I wasn't sure Izzy was going to do anything for me. But once we settled at another table, he put my fears to rest. "Alex, as soon as I saw him. She's been just about anything with pants the entire time you've been married." That bit of news caused me to get up off my chair. I was going to go over and beat the shit out of Cindy and fool. But Izzy grabbed my arm. "Are you a retard or what?" he demanded. "What part of not being an asshole did you not understand? Do you want revenge or don't you?" I sat down sheepishly. "I want revenge more than anything." "Good, so do I." Izzy's eyes seemed to sparkle in anticipation. "Now, what would you like me to do?" "As I already explained," I said, trying to keep my breathing regular. "I don't want to have any more feelings for that bitch. I don't want to love her. I don't want to hate her. I don't want to be annoyed by what she does and with whom. I just want to be indifferent to her." "Consider it done," Izzy said as he reached up and touched my forehead. "What else do you want me to do to those mother lovers?" I wondered if Izzy could really do what he said he could. I didn't feel any different after he touched my forehead. But I had seen Izzy do too many amazing things to doubt him now. So I sat back in the chair and tried to figure out what it was that I really wanted. Then it came to me. "First, I want Cindy to fall desperately in love with me," I said with a grin. "I want her to come crawling home, begging me to take her back. Then when I'm finished, I'm going to let her feel what it's like to be dumped." "Oh, I like how you think," Izzy said with glee. "What about fool?" "Oh yeah, I've got something special in mind for Alex," I said as I rubbed my hands together. "He considers himself such a ladies' man. He thinks he's so macho. First, I want him to find Cindy repugnant. So much so that he'll either transfer her somewhere else or fire her. Also, they have a young attorney who happens to be gay. I want Alex to fall madly in love with him. Since the concept of love as it is practiced here on Earth was foreign to Izzy, I had to explain to him what being gay was. Then I had to explain to him what Alex's peers would think of him when they... Izzy's eyes got wide as he finally grasped the implications of what I wanted to be done to Alex. He couldn't help but chuckle. "You would make my one parent very proud if I knew who the love that was." With our plan agreed upon, we returned to the table with Cindy and Alex. Izzy explained that we would be agreeable to the terms as outlined by Alex. After a few insults from Alex concerning my manhood, we all shook hands and left. After leaving the restaurant, I explained to Izzy I had to check in at my office to ensure that several projects were moving along as they should. Earning a living was another concept that Izzy had no idea about. To him, it seemed like a terrible waste of time. So, I explained that if he wanted me to continue buying coffee and Captain Crunch, I needed to have money. And to get money, I had to make sure that all my construction jobs were completed on schedule and within budget. On the way to my office, I had to ask, How long does it take for these new feelings to take hold? You'll start noticing changes in a few hours, and by tomorrow morning, the process will be complete. A quick review of the reports and a few phone calls told me that all 6 of my projects were progressing well. I decided, after that, to take Izzy for a celebration. I was also curious as to his reaction to naked women. So I took him to a strip club that offered a full range of services for a reasonable consideration. I discovered 2 things about Izzy in the strip club. The first was that alcohol had absolutely no effect on him. However, he did love the taste of rum. So instead of getting him a glass at a time, I bought him the whole bottle. The girls and the bartenders watched him in awe as he guzzled it with no effect. As I sat nursing a scotch and soda, Izzy grabbed my arm and pointed between his legs. I could readily see that he had a raging boner. "No, your body is not defective," I said with a smirk. "In fact, I'd say it's working at peak efficiency." "But how do I get it to go down?" he asked as he began to play with himself. "Well, there are 3 ways to accomplish that," I said as I saw one of the strippers pull her top off. She had spectacular peach. "You can wait, and eventually it will go down on its own." Of the 3, I definitely recommend the third option. "Are you interested?" "Alright," he said immediately as he began to undo his pants. "Let's not be so eager," I said as I pulled his hands away from his pants. "I've got to pay first. This whole concept of paying is just a pain in the peach," Izzy groused. I had no idea how Izzy would react to the entire idea of beautiful intercourse, so I only paid for 1 girl. However, I let the guy taking the money know that if he wanted more than 1 girl, just come get the money. After 5 girls, I decided that Izzy had had enough for today. He was disappointed, but he came along easily enough. I spent the rest of the day showing Izzy the town and explaining how things worked. Of course, we stopped by the grocery store to pick up more coffee, Captain Crunch, tricks, and anything else that seemed interesting to Izzy. By the time I got him home that night, he was still flushed with excitement. As we sat having some coffee, I suddenly realized that I had very little concern for Cindy. It felt like when I first met her. I thought of her as attractive and someone I wanted to get to know. But aside from that, nothing. The intense hurt that had burned through my insides was gone. The next morning, after a box of tricks, a pot of coffee, and a large chocolate bar, I was able to convince Izzy to take a shower. He thought the whole thing was hilarious up to a point. I didn't bother telling him not to eat the soap. So sue me, it's a small town, not much else to do for entertainment. He was still trying to get the taste out of his mouth when I hustled him into the car and headed over to Cindy's office. I had typed up an agreement that listed all of the demands that Alex had made on Cindy's behalf. When we walked into the law office, I didn't spot Cindy at her usual desk, and Alex's door was closed. I glanced over at Izzy with a questioning look. He, in return, shrugged his shoulders. I couldn't help wonder if this part of the revenge didn't work. "Marge, is Cindy around?" I asked the receptionist. Marge looked around to make sure no one could hear her. "Don, she's in the lunchroom. I'm sorry to hear that you guys are breaking up. I think she may be having second thoughts about that decision. Anyway, Alex announced that he's reassigning her to a different office. I don't know what that's all about. Do you mind if I dart in and give Cindy these documents?" I pressed. "Sure," Marge said as she looked around again. "All the partners are out of the office except for Alex. And he's been in his office with Roger, one of the newer attorneys. And that's also odd." "Why is that?" I asked and couldn't help but smile. "Roger's gay, and Alex fought tooth and nail to keep him from being hired." Izzy was now chuckling and rubbing his hands together. "Excellent." I left Izzy in the reception area and made my way to the lunchroom. Cindy was sobbing miserably as 3 other women huddled around her. "Excuse me, Cindy." I tapped on the doorframe. "I've got some papers for you." Cindy's face came up, and she threw herself into my arms. Then in a rush, she said, "Oh Don, I'm so sorry. Can you ever forgive me? I realize now that you're the only one I've ever loved. Do you think there's any chance we can get back together?" I was half tempted to tell her right there, and then that we were through. But I decided that it would be more fun to take her home. I decided that screwing her for a few weeks before I threw her out would be very entertaining. Yes, I was an asshole, but as Izzy would say, love off. I would enjoy the love and let Cindy feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. As I led her away from the other women, I couldn't help but notice their expressions. Their faces had that dreamy quality, as if they had just witnessed some romantic moment. These days, so many women like to believe that they're better than men, but they're not. They're just different. I think the starkest example of that is how men and women process love. Most women want some kind of emotional connection to a guy plus a million other preconditions before they'll have love. For guys, on the other hand, all they require is for the girl to show up naked with a 6-pack of beer. And the 6-pack of beer is optional. When Cindy and I reached the main office, all hell had broken loose. I saw Izzy over by Alex's office, and apparently, he had pushed open the office door. There in all his glory was Roger, Alex and the peach. I have to say that surprised me. I definitely thought that Alex would have been the one with his pull up someone's peach. I guess he was embracing his feminine side. With the office in total chaos, Cindy, Izzy, and I left. I headed back to the house with Cindy playing with me the whole way. And of course, Izzy was leaning over from the back seat to watch. Once home, Cindy dragged me to our bedroom. She stepped out of her dress, and I could see that her panties were soaking wet. I undid her bra and massaged her peach. I stood up and shed my clothes. It was then that I noticed Izzy sitting in a chair in the corner of the room. I was a little self-conscious at first, but then said to myself, "Love it, if he wants to watch, he's earned the right to do so." I decided to just take the plunge. I lined it up and buried it deep. Cindy was screaming now. "Oh Don! Oh Don! Oh Don! Oh Don! Love me hard! Love me hard! Come inside me! Come inside me!" Who am I to deny a lady such a request? So, I just pounded Cindy as hard as I could. Finally, I could feel my balls tighten, and it seemed like I spewed gallons into her. At that point, Cindy passed out. When I rolled off Cindy, I found Izzy standing a foot or two from the bed. He was rubbing his hands together rapidly with his eyes wide. "That was amazing!" Cindy started to stir a few minutes later, and I had her love me hard again. Then I did an encore. I have read a ton of stories about guys having 7 or 8 pleasure. They must be superhuman because, at my best, I have only been able to go 3 times. And the third time, it felt like I was firing water. Izzy had not moved from his spot, but his breathing had gotten more rapid. I realized what he wanted. At first, I was going to tell him no, she was mine. But then I realized that I really didn't have any feelings for Cindy. She was now just a good love. "Do you want to go?" I asked Izzy. He immediately began nodding his head. "Cindy," I said to my soon-be-my ex-wife, "Izzy would like to love you. You'll do it for me, won't you?" I could tell that she really didn't want to have love with Izzy. "Do you really want me to love your friend? It would make me so happy." I sort of lied. Now it was my turn to stand and watch. I have to admit that considering Izzy had never had love until the previous day, he did quite a good job. He loved her 4 times, and we left her on the bed passed out. Over the next 3 weeks, I loved Cindy every morning and every night. We did everything that can possibly be done between a man and a woman. Strangely, Izzy didn't want to have anything to do with Cindy after the first time he loved her. When I asked him about it, he explained that she was such a self-centered bitch with such negative energy that he was uncomfortable being around her. At the end of the 3rd week, Izzy and I decided to go on a road trip. By this time, I had sold my construction business and banked the cash. I didn't get near what it was worth, but Izzy told me not to worry because he would make me a lot of money. Monday morning, after 3 weeks, I told Cindy I was leaving her. "Cindy, do you remember when you called me up to tell me that you were leaving me for Alex?" I asked her as she was making breakfast. She put her head down and mumbled how sorry she was. "Well, you said you didn't have the courage to face me. But you see, I do have the courage to face you. Cindy, I'm leaving you, and here are the divorce papers. I've sold the business, and I've split everything 50-50ths. Here is a cashier's check for your share of the money. Izzy and I are going on a road trip. Have a great life." We had already loaded up my car, but it was really hard getting out of the house. Cindy became unglued and went down on her knees, pleading. She grabbed hold of one of my legs and wouldn't let go. She kept crying, "Don't leave me. I love you so much." I finally had to lie to her. I told her that I'd put the divorce on hold, but I needed some time to myself. She finally let go, and I wasted no time getting out of there. Once on the road, I asked Izzy where we were going. "Vegas, baby, we're going to Las Vegas." "I've got no problem with that," I told him and then asked, "But why? 2 reasons. First, they have gambling, which won't be gambling for us. Second, they have wall-to-wall prostitutes. We spent 2 weeks in Las Vegas, and I'm sure that the gaming houses were glad to see the back of our heads. We took the casinos for almost $8 million. And we did it in such a way that they couldn't complain. If you play blackjack and start winning, the house will accuse you of counting cards. So, we started off playing roulette. But we didn't pick numbers, we just bet red or black. Then we bet odd or even. I have to admit I was very nervous the first time when I put $100,000 on red. Izzy just looked at me like I was moron and told me to grow a pair. So, I made the bet and won. Then I told them to let it ride. It hit red again. I now had $400,000. I then bet it all on an odd number coming up. The pit boss stepped in at that point and halted the game until he cleared the bet upstairs. A minute later, approval was given and an odd number came up. Our bankroll was now up to $800,000. At that point, Izzy suggested that we cash out for the day. After we cashed out and banked our winnings, the casino comped us a suite. They desperately wanted us to stay around, so they could win back their money. The suite was fabulous, and as I prepared myself a drink, Izzy decided to explore. At one point, he came running out excited because they had a water fountain in the bathroom. I started to laugh and told him that it was a bidet. Obviously, he didn't know what that was, so I explained it was to clean your room. After my explanation, Izzy rushed back into the bathroom, and I heard him turn the bidet on. Then he roared with laughter. "This is awesome! And I can still use it like a drinking fountain." Some people are so easily amused. The next day, Izzy wanted to go to a whorehouse. I have to admit that I was curious also. I'd never been to one of the infamous Nevada brothels. On the way to the chicken ranch, Izzy explained what he planned to do. When the girls were paraded before us, Izzy would touch each girl's forehead and plant a desire that they would have an overpowering desire to be with one or the other of us when either Izzy or I called. As Izzy explained, we'd have to pay for the first go-around, but we'd have our pick for free after that. As I said, we left Vegas with about $8 million. I asked him why we didn't just stay there and continue to rack up the money. He said that what he was doing to allow us to win was draining his energy too much. So, we continued to travel around, stopping wherever something struck Izzy's curiosity. Why he wanted to stop and see the world's largest ball of yarn is beyond me. But our tour of Area 51 was fascinating. I don't know how Izzy arranged that, but he did. Oh, in case you're wondering, they do have alien spacecraft there and even preserved aliens. Izzy says the aliens preserved there are all from lower species. I guess to Izzy everyone is a lower species than his people. As we traveled, Izzy told me that he had heard something about Wall Street, but he wanted more information. I explained that it was a place where you could buy shares of interest in companies. The company's value would go up or down, depending on how well they did or how people felt the economy was doing. When I told him it was much like gambling but safer, he became very interested. After that, he began to read copious amounts about Wall Street and all of the ways to make money. After about 3 weeks, he made me stop in St. Louis and open an account with an Edward Jones representative. When I asked him why Edward Jones, he replied that he liked the name. After that, he began buying and selling stocks. He began shorting stocks and buying commodities. Our $8 million was increased to something close to $80 million. We were both tired of being on the road, so we rented a place in my old hometown to recharge our batteries before we headed out again. 3 days after settling in, we were on our way to dinner when 2 men in badly fitting suits stopped us. I had never seen either of them, but Izzy recognized them. They were from his home planet. They wanted to speak to him alone. One thing about Izzy, he is a very upbeat kind of guy. He almost always had a smile on his face. Izzy confided in me one day that he was mad as hell when he had been exiled to this planet. Now, he hoped that his cousin would simply forget about him. To quote Izzy, he was having the time of his life. When Izzy came back from talking to the 2 men, his shoulders were stooped, and he had tears in his eyes. I had never seen him cry. "What's the matter? Did someone die?" I asked. "No, but my cousin has been deposed," he said sadly. "My banishment has been lifted. Are you going to go home?" I asked, distressed that I might be losing my wingman. "I don't have any choice," he explained. "When they deposed my cousin, I became the new ruler of my planet." "Oh," I said softly. "Then I guess you have to go. I'm going to miss you." I have 24 hours to get ready, and then they'll be here to escort me home," Simon said with a sigh. After a moment, Izzy's smile returned. "Since I only have a day left, let's make it awesome." However, Izzy's plan for awesome wasn't anything I would have expected. Instead of painting the town red, which I wasn't really interested in doing, Izzy decided to spend the time wandering around the town and reminisce. We spent the day talking about our travels and adventures. It was as though Izzy wanted to relive them one last time. Actually, it turned out to be a very awesome day. When the two men returned, Izzy asked if he could say goodbye in private. They agreed and waited outside while Izzy and I sat in the kitchen of our rented townhouse, sharing our last cup of coffee together. "Before I go," Izzy said tentatively, "I have an admission to make and an apology." That Izzy was making an admission was nothing new. He made many each day. Most of them concerned new things Izzy had discovered about Earth or its people. That Izzy wanted to apologize was something completely new. I don't recall him ever doing that. He was a damn the consequences, full speed ahead kind of guy. An apology? That's something new, I said with a chuckle, trying to lighten the moment. Izzy took a deep breath and began. "When I first came to this planet and heard you talk about love, I thought it was the biggest waste of time. And when I saw how your ex-wife treated you, I was further convinced that love was a sham. However, in the almost 4 years that I've been here, I've come to realize that I was totally wrong. Your people are born, live pitifully short lives, and then die. And regardless of what you do during your lifetime, in the end, the only thing that matters is the people you loved and those that loved you. I envy you." There was an awkward pause as tears filled Izzy's eyes. I decided that if ever someone needed a hug, it was Izzy, so I reached over and pulled him tight. He returned the hug but then whispered in my ear, "Remember, my name isn't Alex." I cracked up and let him go. "What's the apology?" I finally asked. "Yeah, about that." He was apparently uncomfortable with actually admitting he had done something wrong. "You didn't ask for it, but I figured, what the love, you needed it. When I altered your feelings for your ex-wife, I put in a command that made it impossible for you to fall in love with any woman. I realize now that I was wrong. I'd like to correct that before I leave." I was surprised to learn what Izzy had done, but I realized that I hadn't had any feelings toward anyone as I thought back over our time together. I totally enjoyed having love with women, but I didn't have any feelings other than wanting them to satisfy me. Then it struck me. Recently, I had been feeling more and more dissatisfied. No doubt, my inability to love was part of it. Izzy reached up and touched my forehead. Then he smiled and stepped back. "It's time to go, Sovereign," one of the two men said as he stepped back into the house. "Will I ever see you again?" I asked as I realized that I did love this strange friend of mine. He looked over his shoulder at the two men waiting for him. Then he said in a loud voice, "No, that would be impossible." Then he winked and smiled at me. Epilogue. Revenge is a funny thing. You rarely get the desired results you think you want. Such was the case with Cindy and Alex. If I had known Cindy's reputation, I would never have married her. Even thought she was a cheating slut, we did have some good times, and the love was always excellent. Because of Izzy's implanted command, Cindy was forced to live life loving me. At least that's what I think. I never thought about asking Izzy if his commands ever stopped working. Anyway, because of who Cindy is, and because she can't have me, she turned to prostitution. Now, I'm sure most of you think that I exacted this great revenge that I've reduced her to being a whore. In reality, Cindy always was a whore. The only difference is that instead of glomming money off a clueless husband, she is glomming money off her Johns. Not only that, but she is a high-priced call girl, so she is making a ton of money. Alex parted ways with the firm he was with. It wasn't a friendly parting. Apparently, the firm had a morals clause, so Alex took it in the peach both physically and financially. But when Alex left the firm, he took Roger with him. Together, they opened their own law office serving the gay community. I understand that they are doing quite well. However, it hasn't been all clear sailing for Alex. I learned that, at one point, Roger left him, and Alex tried to commit suicide. Fortunately, he and Roger patched things up and eventually got married. The last I heard, they were trying to adopt. Go figure. When Izzy first offered to help me get revenge on Cindy and Alex, I was excited and thrilled with the idea. But as you can see, it didn't turn out exactly as I had figured. All of these things, plus Izzy being gone, caused me to fall into a depression. I tried to continue the travels that had been so much fun in the past. But without Izzy, they quickly became boring. The money that Izzy had made for us was now worth over $100 million, so I didn't have to work. But it came to me that I needed to work. I realized that I was so unhappy because I didn't have any purpose in life. So, I returned to what I knew best: construction. However, before I started up another construction company, I put the vast bulk of what Izzy had made for us into various charities. I, of course, kept $3 million for myself. I may be clueless, but I don't have shit for brains. Anyway, once that was done, I set up my new construction company just outside of Dallas. That was 3 years ago, and today, I have contracts for projects worth $40 million. 3 of those contracts are to build portions of the southern wall of the United States. A country that doesn't defend its borders isn't a country, it's just a territory. One of the first people I hired was a pretty girl named Kathy Williams. She has bright red hair and sparkling green eyes. She's a tad overweight, but she has a smile that could light up a dark room. We were married a year ago, and I couldn't be happier. I haven't told Kathy about Izzy because I knew that she would never believe me. Sometimes at night, I lie in bed and wonder what it would be like if Izzy came back. One thing for certain, I'm not sharing my wife with him. He's going to have to find his own women.